Welcome, world, to another episode of Leadership Lessons. I am your host, Mr. Lewis Howell. As always, I am with the man himself, Mr. Keshav. Bhatt, how you doing, sir? You good?
Yeah, I'm very well.
I'm not gonna lie, it's been a good
I'm liking
week,
this jump. This
I know, this
I
colour. I do like this colour still. I'll be honest.
And you've almost matched our guest's like lipstick as well. So
Ooh, that's it. There's some synergy here. I'm liking it. To be fair, I have to give the shout outs to my fine lady because she did get this for me. So shout outs to you, love. But yeah, we are joined by an amazing guest today. It's Miss Dalia Gabrial, who is campaign coordinator on fossil-free and migrants' rights at People and Planet.
Yeah.
We are absolutely honoured to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And based on the title that you just heard Dalia has, it means that we are transitioning into a new theme. Kesh, what's the theme for this month, my friend?
So last month we looked at confidence relationships, and this month we're going to be looking at global issues and human rights that you don't always hear about and some of the challenges that society is facing. So last month we were looking internal, inhaling. This month we're looking externally at our communities, at the planet, and the world that we're living in.
And why is that so important, Kesh? Like, we need our viewers to really understand the depth of
this is something we've spoken about before, right? So often you have people kind of tend to migrate into two camps almost in terms of their mindset. One is either they're very insular and they're very internal. So they're thinking about their day-to-day. So it might be, I need to do better in my career. I need to do better with my confidence. And it's all about that personal journey and growth that they're going on, which is great. That's very necessary for everyone. And then there's another group as well who have more of a focus, and I'm generalizing here, of course there's exceptions, who focus more on the communities and the planet and volunteering and making sure that they're making a difference. And so the way I look at it is you need to take a deep breath in and inhale and look at yourself and correct, okay, what are the ideas in my thinking that might be infected by patriarchy or might be infected by my upbringing and my background.
Definitely.
And the place that I come from. But at the same time, what can I now do to go and execute that? And I think the key quote that captures this for me is that spirituality and growth is developed in solitude, but it's fulfilled in community. And there's not enough people who, when we talk about leadership, yes, leadership is about looking in the mirror, changing yourself, but it's also about doing what you can and realizing that the fact that we are sitting here in this very nice office with nice lights and Wi-Fi and everything else, we are extremely privileged.
Massively.
And often the conversation is about the 1% and the wealthy and the ultra rich. But to a lot of people in the world, maybe 80-90%, we are also part of that bracket. And
Definitely.
we don't even realize it. So we have to focus on this topic because it's our duty. And I don't think we should fall into that trap of being entitled and not exploring these things and understanding what is literally happening as a result of us existing, South Kivu in the Congo and where the colton on my microphone comes from,
my phone
and everything else. My existence is tied to somebody else's inequality that they're living in.
Interdependent. We are all so interdependent. And I think this is a great time to talk about today's giveaway, but also get some interaction from yourselves. So what I'd like to do is get you guys in the comments below to answer this question. And actually, as I asked the question, I'm hoping that those loyal viewers would have seen a video that we made last year when we used to do our old podcast called Is Personal Development Actually Making Us Selfish?
Ooh, yeah. That was a good podcast.
That was a really good podcast. And you guys can actually see that. We did also record it visually. So it's on the YouTube channel. So go back in the channel and look for, is the personal development industry making us selfish?
Somebody do us a favor and post it in the comments.
Yeah, put the link in the comments. But I would love to get you guys answers in the comments. Is personal development making us selfish? And the best answer is going to win a copy of...
I thought you were about to jump off the couch.
Nah. Only because I have one with me. A copy of Outliers. Now, most people in this personal development world will know that this is one of the most amazing books that's recommended by many, many people. So you will win a copy of Outliers signed by yours truly, but all three of us really. Yeah. We'll all sign it because I think mine alone might not hold enough weight. But if I get Dalia involved and Kesh too, then definitely just hold enough weight.
One of your goals is to be a very influential person.
Oh, don't worry about that. Give me 5. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, so you will win a signed copy of Outliers. So let's hear it in the comments. Anyway, enough of that. I really want to get you involved in this conversation, because I know, like, guys, honestly, if you need, pause it right now, get a drink, come back, because this is about to get serious. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm going to take a drink too. But today, we're going to be looking at injustices that you don't see or hear about. So, Kesh, do you want to bring Dalia into the game now, because it's about to get real?
Well, when you hear that title, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is, how, as you was kind of saying before, the way that we live our lives and the way that we kind of take for granted, the things that we take for granted every day. What are the historical processes and also the contemporary power imbalances that allow us to live those kind of lifestyles? So I think in terms of the work that I do, I work on climate change and I work on migrant rights. And those two for me are so inherently connected, because the root causes of, forced displacement is kind of very similar to the root causes of climate change. And I think oftentimes it's the most vulnerable, it's the most marginalized, it's the most oppressed people that don't have access to they have a voice, but they don't have access to institutions and people who are the decision makers that can turn what they ask for into reality. So, for example, if you take the recent fire in Grenfell, you had a situation where these residents who are largely, people of color, people living in poverty, and, they had a voice. They were voicing their, they'd formed community organizations, they'd formed groups that warned the authorities of the issues, the lack of sprinklers, etc. But the problem wasn't that they didn't have a voice. The problem was that the institutions to hear that voice and turn it into necessary action didn't exist. So the problem was actually in the power structure. It wasn't with the people. And I think, for me, that is the definition, that is what drives me in my work. It's about making sure that the structures and the infrastructure is there to listen to the people that are at, the marginalized parts of society. This is
incredible. So, I mean, because I'm a big believer in, sort of grassroots, community-based action. But of course, there does come a point at which you do need to engage the key stakeholders that may hold more power in terms of being able to infrastructurally change something. At what point do you know that you need to begin engaging those individuals, or do you try to engage them throughout the process?
So I think the key thing is to build power from the ground up.
Okay.
So all of the big things that we've won, things like the weekend, for example, having a weekend, having,
Can I pause you there? Because you just said that's something that most people won't know, right?
Yeah.
Something
I
that
thought you were going to be
weekend.
what weekend? I don't have a weekend.
Oh yeah, we don't. We just
we don't. No, just get it done.
Can you just unpack that, because some people won't know what you're talking about there?
Yeah. So I mean, basic rights that we take for granted and that we consider to be very integral to how we live our lives in the modern world. So things like a weekend, things like women having the right to vote, things like child labour not existing anymore, at least in or ostensibly not existing. It does obviously still happen. But all of these things that we take for granted and that we consider to be at the heart of our identity as a modern society, none of these things were given to us. None of these things were people in power deciding to be good to the collective. They were all won by struggles, by people power, by people building, coalitions amongst, different groups, expressing solidarity with one another, building a real power base, and then pressuring people in power to say, you're accountable to us. You're not accountable to, just the wealthy or just the powerful. You're accountable to us. And for me, that is the only way that social change happens. I don't believe that we can wait. And especially for urgent issues like the refugee crisis, like climate change, we just don't have the time to wait for governments and people in power to decide to make the necessary changes.
I think a lot of people are probably asking the question, why not?
Well, because if you look, for example, in the case of climate change, ultimately you have, us, the people who know what needs to happen and knows that climate change is a huge crisis, and we know that we need to stop digging for fossil fuels. This needs to be the last year that we dig for fossil fuels if we have any hope of evading the biggest, most disastrous consequences of climate change. But the governments also have another group that's also pressuring them, and that's the fossil fuel companies. And those fossil fuel companies have a lot of power, they have a lot of money, and they are able to lobby governments to not take the decisions that are necessary to protect our planet and to protect our people. So we have to build counterpower to that. We have to say, it's not just the fossil fuel companies that you should be listening to, it's also those of us whose lives and livelihoods are at stake when we sort of face the biggest consequences of climate change. And also the fact that the consequences of climate change are being faced by people in the global south already,
And when you talk about global south, what is that group?
So the global south is basically one term that sort of used to be used to describe the global south as like developing countries. The idea is, they're a group of countries that largely in the southern hemisphere that have a legacy of being colonized by Europe.
Europe.
That are, disproportionately lacking in resources, that experience very high levels of poverty as well, and are disproportionately black and brown countries, largely.
Thanks again.
It's a lot to do with race.
Yeah, of course.
And you were talking earlier, just before we started filming, about, and you mentioned it actually at the beginning of what you're talking about, that link between what's happening with our climate, which you could argue, correct me if I'm wrong, that most of that footprint is coming from wealthy countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the impact is most seen and felt on those in the global south from those impoverished
It's not a balanced equation, is it?
Yeah, so it's one group who have most of the money, who've colonized one other group, and those people are having to suffer the consequences.
Yeah.
So what is that link, and how does climate change link to migration?
So you're absolutely right when you say that it's the countries that contribute the least to climate change that are actually suffering its biggest consequences. So, for example, in 2015, there was a heat wave in India that killed 2,300 people. In the island of Dominica, one storm set development back by 20 years. You have a situation where, particularly in the global south, you have lots of people living in what is called severe multiple poverty, which means that one shove, one event, one push will push you from barely being able to survive to not surviving. So in that context, a drought, a flood, a storm can be literally the lifeline, can be literally the thing that pushes you over that line. And the connection there is rooted historically. It's rooted in the fact that, way back in when Europe industrialized through extracting fossil fuels from the global south, and that continues to be the case. Africa is the wealthiest continent under the ground, and that's why it's the poorest on top of the ground. So
I love that.
That's
There's no fire extinguisher in this room. There's no fire extinguisher. What's going on? What is going on? Nah, this is mad, because literally this morning I was speaking. It sounds so weird. I was speaking to my Snapchat. That doesn't make any sense. But I was speaking to my Snapchat.
You dropped an MBS.
Yes, I did drop an MBS. So
where can you just let them know what MBS is? And where they can find that?
So really quickly.
It's powerful.
All right, cool. So really quickly. So when I first started using Snapchat, I decided that as opposed to just being like everybody else who just document their day, which is obviously at times very good, I also try and give a bit of value to people, because I felt that in that it was just a new way of being able to connect people. You've got 10 seconds to give as much of a message as you can, and then obviously you can continue it on and turn it into a story. So I created this brand called MBS, which is Mind, Body and Soul. And for example, if I felt that there was something to do with personal development or even social awareness, I would put that under maybe the mind category, and I'd share that. If it was body, I might put like if I'm eating some healthy food, or if I've just finished working out. And soul, it would be like something that I felt really did connect with me as a human being and the way I connect to everyone else in this world. So it might be like listening to some reggae music with some conscious lyrics, or it could be anything like that. But anyway, I had not been doing it as consistently as usual, and I had people reaching out to me saying like, Lewis, like genuinely, like I wait for this every morning. What's going on? Do you know what I mean? Like, and like people coming up to me at events like, bro, I know it's been a while, but I just wanted to let you know that like you haven't done MBS, and I'm getting. And so I went to one of my friends' wedding recently, and one of my friends that was there, like, yes, Jake, how you doing? He's like, I'm good, but where's MBS? I was like, right, do you know what I mean? Strong. Yeah, literally. So I was like, do you know what? Thanks, Jake. Do you know what I'm saying? So shout out Jake Rose if he's watching. But this morning, the message that I shared was essentially, just to cut it short, was around controlling what you can control. And that was saying that so often we try as individuals to blame others, but really all we should be focusing on is what we can control. But I want to actually look at the opposite to that, which is the fact that, well, actually it's in alignment and opposite, which is the fact that for some people in the world, in this global south, they can't control a natural disaster. But that could literally be the end of their life. So going back to your point, Keshav, about us being privileged, we are privileged enough to say that if a natural disaster happened, there are precautions we can take. Some of them genuinely can't take many precautions, and that could be it. So now what it does bring it back to is what we can control as these individuals and citizens in these privileged countries is how can we control the actions we take to ensure that we do not put those individuals at harm. So what are some of the things that we could be doing? Because I'm sure there are some people sitting there going, oh yeah, I know, but I don't just like leave the heating on unnecessarily. But what are some of the things tangibly, practically that we can be doing to ensure that we don't continue to put these people at harm if possible?
Can I add a sub question to that?
Yeah.
Which is just, how can, where are some good places to go to be informed as well?
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think that the point that sort of you mentioned about how classically when we frame what should we do about climate change, we think about it on very personal levels. So we think, oh, you know, like I recycle, I switch off the light, and those are all good things. Yeah. But that's just not enough, essentially.
Right.
So what I would argue is I kind of go back to the beginning of, you know, we need to build social movements, because even though we're not on the front lines of climate change right now, our governments and, you know, the City of London, which is not that far away, make decisions that have huge impacts in the rest of the world. And we have access to that. We have our vote. We have the fact that we can protest in the streets. We have the fact that we can participate in all of these sort of political movements. So I think we should be using our voice collectively to pressure the decision makers in our country who have a huge impact over the rest of the world. So one example would be, you know, I'll use the example of the campaign that I was working on, that I've been working on this year. It's called Fossil Free Finance, which is basically taking heed from a lot of movements in European countries where they basically try and get banks to stop funding fossil fuel projects. So in France, for example, this has been really successful. They've gotten massive French banks like Natixis to drop coal completely.
Amazing.
And recently, we've managed to get a commitment from Barclays to massively reduce the amount of coal projects that they finance. So that's an example of, you know, through a few years of very dedicated campaigning, you have, you know, gotten one of the, you know, banks that are the biggest financiers of fossil fuels to basically, you know, cut it off at the source.
That's
cut
massive.
It off at the
That's
money.
something worth celebrating.
Yeah, it's
and that's
huge,
why this was like this is about the things you
victory.
don't see.
Yeah,
because we don't see that. We don't see when Barclays puts their hand in their pocket and says to the fossil fuel company, "Here you go."
Yeah.
We're not seeing that. So us thinking that we're switching off the light and changing the world. Let's be real.
And I think what we also don't see is we also don't see that it works. I think that we're often made to feel so disempowered that, you know, we think of activism or we think of protesting as just kind of pointless.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, as I said, the biggest things that we've won in society, you know, have all been through social movements, and we're winning every day. You know, we're winning at, you know, in the fossil free campaign. Just recently, we had Barclays has now broken a contract with the biggest fracking company in the UK, which means that we're going to see much less fracking happening in the UK. And that's just a group of students. That was a group of students that won that.
Who were those students? Let's shout them out right now.
I think that's a social reform win.
That's a social reform way, like, absolute, you know, that's a celebration.
Yeah,
definitely.
and also, you know, and with fracking as well, like we had, you know, anyone can get involved. Like I think we often think of activists as being like a really specific kind of like annoying keyboard warrior type person, but in Yorkshire where they were threatening to frack, you had like old like Yorkshire grannies like knitting on the front lines and like doing all the protests and like that worked. It had
Amazing.
an impact.
Yeah.
You
And
need to get your granny involved.
Hey, listen, I'll get my granny up there just doing a word search. You know what I'm saying? Like, me and my gran, I was sitting in my grand's house on Wednesday doing a word search with her. Shout out to my gran for just making up words in
Grannies
the
are
word
great,
search. You know what I'm saying? Like, granny, the word that she's finding in the thing is not in the list that you're supposed to find. She's like, yeah, but I found the word though, so they're going to have to add it. I'm like, granny, anything. But anyway, yeah, no, but that is powerful. And I think that's almost about us doing what we can do, you know? And I think this is another thing. Often people, they give themselves a barrier to starting or a barrier to participating because they think, oh, but I don't know enough. Or, oh, but this is not something that falls within my remit of skill. Well, what do you do? Oh, you knit. Okay, can you just knit right here instead of knitting over there? Simple. That's not hard.
Yeah. You have to give your skill set. Yeah.
You know, and look,
Everyone's
we're sitting
got
here
something
because this is within our skill set. We're all able to speak publicly. So this is something we will do to ensure people stay informed. So before we progress it, Keshav did also ask where people can go to be informed about these things. So let's ensure that we do give our viewers that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're a student, People and Planet is an organisation that basically supports students running campaigns, and we have our 3 campaigns that we run. So we have Migrant Solidarity, which is the one that I helped to set up, the Fossil Free campaign, which is around climate justice, and we also have our Workers' Rights campaign, which is basically to improve workers' rights in the supply chain for electronics. So you were talking about your phone earlier on.
Yeah.
So exactly like that kind of stuff. So that's an example. If you're a student, you can set up a People and Planet group, or you can just get in touch with us. You don't have to do it as People and Planet, but we will support you with campaign strategy. We'll support you with getting your targets, with connecting you to other student groups. And there's so many, when it comes to climate change, there are so many brilliant organisations, places like War on Want is a really good organisation, Friends of the Earth as well. And they all, what I really love about those organisations is that when they talk about climate change, they're not just talking about nature and polar bears, they're talking about the people and justice and equality being at the heart of, because I'm a city girl, like I'm born and bred South London, like I don't like nature, I don't like all of that. So
South London in the house. Just saying.
I was just thinking this morning, I miss London. There are a lot of good things in London, including Crosstown Donuts. Donuts on a Friday, but there's something about, you know, the city versus like being in a quieter place.
Yeah. With the environmental stuff, I was always like, I don't really, care about but then I realised that actually, no, I really care about people and I really care about equality and justice, and climate change is like where all of those things come together, and it's really, at the heart.
It's an issue that's a very interesting cross point. As you were talking about before, there's that intersectionality between, when you talk about climate change, you can't just talk about that. You've got to talk about workers' rights. You've got to talk about
100%.
women's rights. You've got to talk about migration as well, because all of those things are affected in a very, very big way
by climate
change.
Exactly.
And then you've got to go into like colonialism and neoliberalism, because those things also, and the economy, because they're all kind of, it's a melting pot, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, what climate change does is it breathes new life into all of these existing issues. So if you care about racism, if you care about migrants' rights, you have to care about climate change, because it is the issue that's going to frame all of these issues in the,
Would you go as far as saying it's the most important issue, right, of our time?
I mean, I generally not sure if it's useful to kind of try and hierarchize things like that. I think it's more about seeing them as connected in a circle, and what climate change does is it intensifies everything. It makes everything more urgent and more sort of more critical. So it's not so much about saying, oh, it's bigger or it's more important. It's about saying that it makes everything more urgent. It makes everything more kind of, okay, no, we need to come up. And also that our solution to climate change can't just be, oh, we'll just found a new technology to reverse the impacts. It's actually, we have to look at the underlying.
I find that so funny, like that whole argument. Yeah. Or that argument of, oh, we're just going to find some new planets, or we're going to put
it's like none
billions into living on the moon.
Yeah.
And the problem there is, and you see it right the way down to relationships and relationship issues. It will solve the symptom, but not actually address the root cause.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Hey, someone send this to Donald Trump when we're finished, please. Hey, make sure. Donald, talking to you, my friend. Yeah.
think he needs a lot of help.
It's not just his hair or his skin. I saw a picture of him this morning. I was like, why is he orange?
Needs some mind, body, and soul advice.
Yeah, drop him an MBS.
I'm gonna drop him.
And where
an
do they
MBS.
follow you if they want to see an MBS? You didn't mention that.
We'll put it in the link, but big_Lewis the first.
Wow.
DA, right?
No, THE.
Okay, cool.
Big_Lewis the first on Snapchat. So yeah, going back into it though, guys. I mean, I would love to hear from you, Dalia, and potentially even yourself, Kesh, on one or two of the biggest shocks that you've had when you've delved into this area of, trying to create a fossil-free world or climate change or migrant solidarity. One or two of the things that have shocked you most that most people probably don't know about. Yeah.
So I think for me, one of the biggest shocks that, and kind of the fact that I think makes me feel so overwhelmed sometimes is the actual scale of environmental migration that's going to be happening. So by the end of the century, we're looking at 1 billion people who will be displaced because of climate change. That's a country the size of China being displaced from their homes. So I think for me, how are we going to cope with that, and how are we not taking more action to make sure that doesn't happen? Yeah.
That is heartbreaking. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely heartbreaking, definitely. I mean, did you have another one, or should I throw it to Kesh?
I think the thing that makes that even more of a violation for me is that, on the other hand, a population the size of China is about to be displaced. Neymar, 200 million.
There you go.
It's just a totally warped, different world.
And where do those owners make their money?
Exactly. And we're there celebrate. Like, football fans will fight each other because you're wearing the wrong T-shirt in the wrong part of the stadium. And who are you really fighting? Is that really where you want to put your energy? And I don't judge or blame because that's partly because you can't blame someone for what they don't know or what they're not aware of. But when you see that picture, it's still very, very striking to me. The one for me that I mentioned before we started filming that I think is just another huge injustice that surprises me and really just gets right in my heart in the feels is what's happening in Calais right now with a lot of the migrants. And we went out and volunteered there twice. And the first time that I went, we had to literally smuggle in wood at 5 o'clock in the morning and run covert missions to try and get it in, just so that they could take and I'm talking really, really poor quality wood that we found, that the cheapest stuff that you use for, what do we call those things?
Just for them to make little tables and that sometimes. But even like a shelf, literally a shelf.
Exactly. And, out of bits of trees and stuff, and we'd get stopped and we'd get searched and
that's it.
Just hassled and
we're trying to bring in a screwdriver. Come on.
Exactly. And that is frustrating enough for you as a volunteer. But I would also always check it myself. Why are you getting frustrated? Because you don't live in that condition. So at the end of the day, if this is one small little hassle, if someone's doing that to you, then it's really not that big in the grand scheme of things. Other things that I've seen when I went to Kenya 2 years ago and volunteered in Mathare or in Nakuru or in Kisii, seeing the conditions that people were living in there, and I guess what kind of impact our Western media has on then colonizing both their resources under the ground, their economy, but then also their thinking. And I was volunteering once in a shelter for teenage girls who've been sexually and physically abused. And I remember, I'd go there on a Monday and I'd see the girls, they don't have any food, they have ketchup and flour in their cupboard, and they have psychological issues that, affect them on a daily basis. And there aren't any counselors or anyone that are going to help them to get over that trauma. And the one thing that they had is a TV. And the one channel that they had was they're seeing a Nicki Minaj video, and that's what they're mimicking. And that, when you see that, and as a male in the group going into that environment, it played into the interactions that we had, because they would copy the way that they thought women should behave for men, for their sensual pleasure, and that that's a very uncomfortable experience as a human being, but also just thinking about like, wow, like that's how damaged and ravaged we've literally not only raped their planet, but their people and their children. And that's going to go on as a cycle. So how do you begin to break that? And it takes time. So for me, yeah, those things, like they always come to the forefront because, you know, I'm very blessed that I've been able to be educated. I get to have conversations with people like yourself and Lewis on a daily basis, where I'm getting to learn. But the things that they're learning might be something from, you know, a corrupt religious leader who's just there spouting nonsense to them to take what little they have, or you know, giving them ideas from a book that he might have read about entrepreneurship, and yeah, you can do it because it's the American dream, but really that's the people's nightmare. So that for me is the thing that just gets me really, really annoyed. So.
And you know, I mean, I know we're going to be wrapping up very shortly, but like, I think I want to share one as well, and I think for mine, I have to go down the route of what you're talking about in terms of finance, because one of the things that I only learned about when I was probably 16, and it's only become more prevalent and something that I've identified more and more often in my recent life, is that there are so many of these countries in the global south, or these developing countries, that when they do go through the process of development, where that money comes from is from Western civilizations who essentially are loaning them money at such ridiculous interest rates that, of course, their country is not going to be able to grow economically at a rate that will allow them to pay back that loan, where literally they're probably infinitely indebted to these countries. So they're just paying back interest. And so these countries are always going to be at the helm of these other countries. And that makes me sick. And I mean, obviously, one that most people will know, but that makes me the most sick is the Haiti and France situation. Like, Haiti fought with, like, for ages to battle multiple countries to gain their independence, to then, not long after, essentially just be enslaved again.
Yeah, and I think also with that, you know, what is so striking about that is that the wealth of those countries that was built off the back of those countries that they're now getting back into that cycle. So it's all incredibly, you know, I think the world as we see it today, it kind of appears natural. It appears that that's just how it has to be, but actually it's come that way because of choices and actions and like a series of things that have been imposed, and we could have made different choices, and we can make different choices now. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, one of the videos that went viral recently was of Dr. Umar Johnson, who, when he was on the Breakfast Club, and he was talking about the situation in specifically Jamaica, but it's a lot of the Caribbean now, but of, like, you know, the amount of Chinese investment that's going into Jamaica and is lining the pockets of your senior politicians and is causing, you know, like when you in Jamaica, someone from China can go and start a business in Jamaica and not pay taxes for 5 years. Someone in Jamaica wants to start a business, they'll be lucky if they even get a meeting with the person in the bank to get a loan. Do you know what I mean? So it's crazy. And so then what you end up having is this situation where foreign money is being invested into developing countries, but those people who actually are citizens within those countries often don't reap the benefits. No. And so it sickens me, literally. But then I sit there and I go, like, genuinely, what can I do? You know, and we can share these messages, we can share that information, but how do you stop such a transaction happening? And I think that's a lifelong effort that has to be applied, essentially. So,
yeah, I think it's also important to know that, remember that there are very strong and vibrant movements in the global south resisting, particularly fossil fuel extraction. Frontline and indigenous communities have led the resistance against fossil fuel extraction for decades. And I think we can see ourselves, they are agents as well in many ways, and we can see ourselves acting in solidarity with them and really listening, rather than reproducing that colonial logic of, we know what's best for you, we're going to impose ourselves on you, of actually listening to them saying what they need from us. And the Fossil Free Finance campaign really came out of, you know, for example, with the Dakota Access Pipeline, where the indigenous communities were saying, what we need you to do is we need you to stop it at the source that's with you, at the financing source. We'll resist it here with our bodies, and we need you to stop it at the other end. So it's really about heeding the call as well of those who are on the front line and seeing ourselves as being in service of them, and that's part of the reparative justice as well.
I got a deep nugget of the day, you know.
I got bars.
Yeah. Literally, my mind's ticking. So, yeah, we're going to have to wrap this one up. I mean, I know that I've got to shoot. I mean, do you have anything else you want to throw into
just
mixing pot, Kesh?
Do your thing, because I need to get to a notepad right now.
Oh, serious? Oh, so you're ready to wrap up so you can get to a notepad? All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us, Dalia. You have been absolutely fantastic today. I was Queen Shy guys, we're on Facebook Live simultaneously, and Queen Shy has just joined us. Have you got a question for Build the Buzz before we wrap up? You've got literally 10 seconds to type that if you have. But essentially, what I wanted to share was, and I think you just literally said this, but I just want to put it into words for the viewers, and that is that even when you think you are leading social change, what you need to understand is the beneficiaries of your work need to be at the center of all of it. Do not engage in what you believe is positive social change or social action or social leadership just for you to be able to say, this is what I did. This is what I am doing. This is what I believe is right. You need to humble yourself and start with, what is the real issue? Have I spoken to the people who are suffering day to day and put their messages and the primary information at the heart of everything you do? So understand, no one cares that you are at the heart of it. All we care about is the results, yeah? And the way in which you operate to get those results. So this has been another episode of Leadership Lessons. Kesh, thanks a lot, my brother.
As always.
Dalia, thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, you've been fantastic. And guys, tune in next week for another episode of Leadership Lessons. And don't forget, leave your comments below to win a signed copy of Outliers. Is the personal development industry making us selfish? We'll catch you again next time. Peace.
I wasn't sure when you were going to do the piece.
Yeah, I know, I'm saying. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? I normally give you a bit more longer reports. Yo, that was a solid episode.